unfortunately, right? And it means that we can all be, threatened by climate change. I didn't want to be that there. Yes.
Isn't that why it's like fake autumn at the moment right now?
Isn't that what?
Fake autumn, because of the
fake autumn. Okay.
Yeah, because it was so high.
Yeah.
The environment now thinks it's like autumn time, but when it wasn't supposed to be, so the leaves were falling earlier.
Okay, well, I mean, are you saying climate change is fake or just now? I mean, I know that. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Well, if you're trying to frame your question in terms of how we appreciate climate change and all of that, I don't know if I could use the word fake. But what I probably would say is that climate change is real and it's happening.
Oh, sorry.
That's what you're saying, isn't it? That's where the leaves are falling off the trees.
At the moment, it was like fake autumn.
No, fake autumn.
Like false spring.
Oh, sorry, I do. Oh, yeah. Well, that's possibly, yes. Sorry, I'm saying. Yes, that's actually possible. That's one of the effects of climate change. I know something about these effects of climate change. They also impact a range of human and people's rights. Okay, that's something I'll talk about very shortly. Now, but we've still not said what the energy transition is. We've merely scratched the surface. We've merely laid a foundation for its, for its being, for its existence, if you will. What exactly does energy transition mean? It simply means the transition from, the use of fossil fuels, which are conventional energy sources. So here you think about oil, you think about gas, you think about nuclear, you think about coal, the dirtiest of them all. And it simply means transitioning from the use of those resources to a future where we get to use cleaner forms of energy. So here you think about renewable energy and the rest of them. That's what the energy transition is. And the reason for that is that conventional energy sources are great contributors to climate change, okay? Because climate change more than many other resources. So we need to jettison them. And one of my favorite characterizations of the energy transition is for you to imagine a stage, a theater. All right. So in a theater, you've got stage left, you've got stage right, and actors and actresses can come on either of the two stages. So picture a theater, and stage left, fossil fuel has existed the stage, all right? It's done its bit. It's cost harm. It has also provided some benefits. We have to admit that, but it's done its worst and it has to leave the stage. Then on the right, clean energy has to come in. And we absolutely need clean energy because we need to move to a future where we rely on sustainable energy fuels. Sustainable energy that doesn't contribute to climate change. So that is just the whole idea of the energy transition. Transitioning from unsustainable modules of energy to cleaner forms of energy. But that's not the picture of the energy transition. It's not the entire picture, if you will. Now, the energy transition is urgent. I've talked about this, but it also comes with its challenges, all right? And at the start of this presentation, I gave a very simplistic example, which is, if you remember sometime, well, obviously you won't remember, but if you've obviously read, you know that one of the modes of transportation in the past used to be by the use of, animals like donkeys and all of that. And then the Industrial Revolution came, we began having machinery, and then started having automobiles and all of that. That's a transition, okay? And what that simply tells us is that every transition has got its challenges. Now, the energy transition is painted like the good person in the room, which is all good, which is all fantastic. We need it to stay alive. But it is also producing certain problems. And these problems can be conceptualized as injustices. But before we talk about that conceptualization, which is going to constitute the focus of this presentation. Let's look at some of these challenges of the energy transition. And there's a whole variety of them, but I've decided to just pick and discuss one of them, which is critical mineral extraction in Africa, all right? And critical mineral extraction actually occurs in many other parts of the world. So for example, there's the Latin American region, where you have the lithium triangle engaging countries like Argentina and co. You've also got critical mineral extraction in Europe, like Serbia, for example. But I want to focus on the African continent, obviously because we're here, this event is part of African dialogue, so we need to also look at challenges and also opportunities concerning the African continent. Now, critical minerals, as some of you may know, are needed for the energy transition. So here we're talking about things like lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, graphite. These are all useful resources for renewable energy technologies. Now, if you have an electric vehicle, one thing you may know is that it runs on battery, and that battery is made of lithium. So without lithium, we can have electric vehicles. And it's the same thing too with wind turbines. Wind turbines produce wind energy, and without critical minerals, you can't have wind turbines. Now, just to put things in perspective, the International Energy Agency has said that, look, there's going to be a real scramble for critical minerals from this year up until 2030. In other words, demand for critical minerals will increase. And what that really does is that the injustices created by critical mineral extraction are likely to triple, okay? But what are those injustices? What are those challenges with respect to critical mineral extraction? And when it comes to extracting critical minerals on the African continent, there's the deployment of a particular labor tool, which rather unfortunately is the use of child labor. And one instance where this happens is the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Congo is a very important country when it comes to critical minerals. And that's because the Congo has got the highest, or rather the largest reserves of cobalt, which is an absolute essential critical mineral. It's the largest in the world. Now, when statistics were taken of small-scale miners, because usually this cobalt is mined by small artisanal miners, out of 100,000 small-scale miners, you had at least 40,000 of them being children. Okay, so you had children mining, and there's a picture there showing children at a mine in Congo, right? So you have children working in mines. I mean, instead of them to be in schools, instead of them to be engaged in other productive activities and all, they are mining. And that raises a problem which needs solution, right? So how then do we address that problem? It's through the intervention of energy justice. So energy justice is the framework that helps us to identify these challenges with respect to the energy transition and call for their redress. So that's why energy justice helps to identify and address those challenges. It helps us to amplify voices on the margin. But before we can use energy justice, we need to define that term. And trust me, this is the elephant in the room because it is very difficult to define what energy justice is. During my thesis, I struggled to get grips with it. And that is because different scholars have come up with different diverse meanings of energy justice. A first-timer studying energy justice would likely leave bewildered. So that causes a problem, and that's because of the nature of justice. Justice is a multifaceted concept which everyone defines according to how they perceive it. So that difficulty in defining justice has seeped into energy justice, making it difficult to say what it is. But we mustn't despair, all right? We have to still define or interpret energy justice. Now, if you read the literature on energy justice, you'd find scholars have attempted to adopt a methodology for saying what energy justice is. They adopt a two-step methodology. The first step requires identifying something called dimensions of justice. Dimensions of justice are simply the kinds of justice, the ways that justice can be applied. So you've got distributive justice, which tells us about distributing the benefits and burdens of society fairly. You've got recognition and procedural justice. But that doesn't end the story. Even with those dimensions of justice, we still have to add something. We still have to include one further element, and that element is something called conception of justice. So let me give you an example. If I say that, let's assume I've got this bottle of water and I want to distribute it to everyone in the room. Well, distributive justice says I have to do that fairly, but it doesn't tell us what fairly means. To know what fairly means, we have to use a conception of justice. So it could be maybe distributing it to those who need it, or perhaps distributing it to those who merit it. So conceptions of justice could be different, and there's a whole lot, but my favorite conception of justice is African communitarianism, and I'll tell you why that is the case. It is simply because, remember I told you we looked at the challenge of the energy transition in Africa, but I also told you that Africa also holds opportunities for addressing the energy transition. And one of those opportunities has to do with the gift of African communitarianism. So African communitarianism is simply saying that, look, we all have to value harmonious and communal relationships. And what that simply means is that we need to identify with one another in the community, and we need to show solidarity. Solidarity means that if you find that a member of the community needs help, you have to help them for their own sake, not because of what you intend to get from them. So that's just African, it's the most simplified, not simplistic, but the most simplified version of African communitarianism. Now, when you apply African communitarianism to energy justice, it will help you to address those challenges with the energy transition. And that's simply because applying it to energy justice invokes normative concepts like identity, solidarity. One of the questions I usually get, well, one of the questions I got in my Viva, my PhD Viva was, what is African communitarianism? Why do you even need it? Well, I had to say that we need it because if I told you to stop using child labor in Congo, you would ask me why should I do that? But because we're invoking African communitarianism, it gives us a reason for stopping that. So energy justice in that case acts as a normative basis for addressing those injustices. And finally, we need to still ask ourselves, how then do we translate energy justice into practice? Because everything I've just talked about sounds so theoretical, sounds so conceptual. And that is where that is where the law comes in. Now, there are different kinds of law that will be invoked to translate energy justice from theory to practice. My favorite kind of law is international environmental law. And that's simply because international environmental law impacts the energy transition. So we can invoke international environmental law. And when you look at international environmental law, it contains different rules and institutions and treaties and conventions that can be useful. One of those treaties is the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement, the use of the Paris Agreement to implement energy justice has been underused. utilize. There is no time, I would have really gone into that, but just to summarize, the Paris Agreement has got provisions that can help us. For example, it recognizes the fact that we need to address climate change, and those points serve as entry points to address the challenges with the energy transition. The Paris Agreement can also help us advance the SDGs, which are also related to some of the challenges with energy transition. And just to summarize, the energy transition is necessary, is urgent to control climate change, but the energy transition is producing different injustices which require remediation. An African communitarian approach to energy justice can help us to address those challenges. And international law, or international environmental law to be more specific, can help us to move from theory to practice. This is just a helicopter overview. I have a book coming out later this year. Maybe hopefully some of you can have a look at it to know more about African communitarianism and energy justice. So thank you very much for listening and for being on the
time because we had some IT issues, which were nobody's fault, so that's fine. I would like you to note your questions. I don't want you to lose your questions because questions are amazing, but I'm going to do my presentation and then we'll take all the questions at the end if that's okay with you, because otherwise it might leave me having to speak too fast for it to be useful for anyone. So again, thank you everyone who's joining us both in person and online and in spirit, for those who are not here with us, including our ancestors. We're actually going to end up looking at the back of my hair the whole time. Hello. Okay, great. Thank you. Where is my presentation? Did you load my presentation?
You have to go to.
You don't mind. Thank you. Is there a way to switch this camera to the other one? Not you, I'm not asking you. Does anyone know how to do that?
This one.
Yeah, because otherwise it's gonna be, hello.
That may be over the risk.
It's okay. I'll talk like this. Maybe I will understand. Thank you. There's just so many layers to these issues and these topics. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to explore it with Cheatsy and with yourselves. And I know we have people from different fields and different departments here, and that's fantastic. So I thank everyone online and here for your interest in our work and for your curiosity. So I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Can everyone online see the slides? Maybe? Yes, no?
That's in there, funny. Yes, there's exams on. So.
Yeah, okay, amazing, thank you. Can I use this? Yes, I can. Okay, so my particular angle is a little bit more social science, a little bit more humanities oriented, rather than strictly legal. And there's a history aspect of this because I want to unpack a case study on Ghana. So this particular topic is rethinking Ghana's mineral rights through the lens of customary law. I have done field work in Ghana since 2010. I've returned to Ghana maybe five different times, and specifically looking at the gold industry. Ghana is quite a unique case, and we're going to learn about that. Obviously, Africa is over 50 countries, including contested areas like the Western Sahara and Somaliland. So there's a lot more to learn about all these regions, and all of these countries have so many different cultures, so many different civilizations and languages. This is just a small overview and a photo of a snapshot of mineral issues and customary law in Ghana. This to work. Oh, please. Yes, wonderful. So we'll go through just a background overview, what we're going to look at. Ghana, we all know about gold, former Gold Coast, colonial name, bauxite, other minerals. A resource governance is both a civil, modeled after British law, as well as customary law, where some Ghanaian traditional resource management has survived through the colonial period, but the civil law and customary law do not quite blend together. So that makes it quite challenging to manage customary natural resource rights with quote unquote modern British inspired post-colonial legal frames. Ghana, the region now known as Ghana, was impacted as was North and West Africa, by both Arab expansion and European expansion and colonialism, enslaving, both by Arabs for millennia and by Europe for about 500 years. These have also had an intense impact on the region, not just on Ghana, but on surrounding countries. Colonial laws did centralize mineral rights with the state, which was a colonial concept. So that has really transformed the way Ghanaians are able to manage natural resources and how that fits into Ghanaian civilization with its long history of many different civilizations within that region. There are some post-colonial struggles between modern law and traditional authority. So first, we're going to look at some different land maps of Ghana, the country now known as Ghana. So the first one here on the left is agricultural land use. Some of the agricultural land use is for local consumption. Some of the agricultural land use is for exportation and foreign consumption. So we've got cocoa. Cocoa is a product from the Mesoamerican continent. It is from Mexico and Central America. It is not indigenous to Africa, but it does grow very well in Ghana. And that's mostly for export. It's not for local consumption. Maize also is a Mesoamerican product. Cassava is local, sorghum, plantain local, groundnut local. So some of these are for indigenous consumption and some of them are for export. And you can see there's a lot of cocoa being grown, and that is land that could be used to feed Ghanaians, but instead it's going into foreign exports. And you'll see the regions where agricultural products are grown and where it tends not to be grown. Here is the regions of the climate. So you'll notice this kind of verdant green is where we have a lot of the cocoa being grown. And then the regions with more light blue, which is more grassland, you don't have as much agricultural products. And then you have the built up areas in the Ashanti Kingdom and in the Accra, the capital region. And you have some on the coast as well, but lots of other regions have sparse population. This is a mineral map. And what's interesting is you'll notice that this is too small for me to go through all the different minerals, but you have very rich mineralogy along the west coast and in the south, which happens to overlap with the agricultural land. So you're going to have some competition between people and farming land for export and farming land for subsistence. So that's something that you're going to find in any country where you have an overlap of agricultural land with mining land. So in terms of Ghana being multi-resource mining, it's a political state definition, and borders of Ghana have changed over centuries. The name Ghana as an empire was not attributed to the country we now know as Ghana. There was the Ghana Empire, which was significantly more north from what is now southeastern Mauritania, Mali, parts of Senegal potentially, and that was from the 6th century till the 13th century. That was the Ghana Empire. It went into decline and then became the Mali Empire. And the modern state of Ghana used that name for their state after they got rid of the gold state term. So the borders across Africa, many of them are significantly influenced by colonialism. So that's something to keep in mind. My ancestors, part of my ancestors are from the region formerly known as Ghana, which is that empire that declined and then was taken over by the Mali Empire. My ancestors, Susu, had that region for about 35 years. We managed to get a hold of it, and then we lost it because we had a king who was a bit overzealous. And so there's a lot of ethnic dynamism in that region in terms of mineral resources, in terms of overlapping with Arab trading. Again, the artificial national concept, partially defined by colonial relationships, wars won, wars lost. Significant currency devaluation right now in Ghana is making life increasingly difficult. The CD, the Ghana currency, for a period was 2 to 1 to the dollar. And I think now, I'm not sure if it might be 6 or 7 to the dollar. So life has become quite difficult. So you have rapid inflation, and there's some political dissatisfaction in the country in terms of the economy. Let's see, we have ethnic and linguistic diversity. I don't want to go over too much of this. One of the unique aspects of Ghana's legal system is they have parallel civil and customary law. And the customary law, when it comes to land and resources, is referred to as the stool land, the Ministry of Stool Land. And when they say stool, they mean chair, but the stool actually is a throne. It is a traditional throne. Some of them are made out of solid gold. So that, for example, is an image of one of the stools of one of the chieftains. And the stool land is land in Ghana upon which there is a stool, which is a chief's throne. And so that is a ministry that exists to this day, and it is a ministry that is able to draw gold royalties from mining companies. And those royalties go to the chief, usually male. Almost all the chiefs in Ghana are male. I think there's one female chief because there were no male descendants, but traditionally it's always a man. And then he or she is responsible for redistributing resources to the community. And that traditional resource sharing has been disrupted by civil law, but it's something worth looking into in terms of how Ghana manages natural resources. So that's a bit of an overview. In terms of metallurgical practices, let me watch the time. I'll go very, very quickly. Pre-colonial era Ghanaian metallurgy, they were very, very skilled and still are very, very skilled goldsmiths. They had bloomery furnaces, they produced tools, they produced weapons, they produced artwork, obviously. They produced artifacts of religious and spiritual significance. That gold, there's a beautiful BBC documentary from Black History Month last year done by a Ghanaian British man who went to Ghana and interviewed some of the royal chiefs and had a discussion about how gold was really sacred. Gold was really the way that chiefs legitimized their power. And so gold wasn't just a commodity, it was a spiritual item and a spiritual metal for use of their cultural uses. So they had advanced techniques in agriculture and military capabilities, and they had a very wide trade networks which spanned into Europe and into Arabia. In terms of the Akan society, so that's one of the large chieftaincies, gold was symbolized as divine, political legitimacy, authority. The golden stool, Sika Dwa Kofi, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, which I probably am, descended in 1701, Ose Tutu I's reign, and it was unity, spiritual sovereignty. And again, this was the gold was linked to that stability politically and socially and economically, which was interrupted by extractive industries. There's also a big issue continuing with museum repatriation. Ghanaian gold has been looted and taken by colonizers and is in museums around the world, and it's very challenging for Ghanaian authorities and traditional leaders to get it back. In terms of trans-Saharan trade, so we're talking about trade from Ghana across the Sahara into Arabia and also up into Europe, if it's going that way versus directly into Europe this way. The trade routes that linked West Africa through North Africa and the Arab world, a distinction about Arab slaving was the Arab civilization mostly enslaved women for reproductive purposes, whereas Europeans tended to enslave more men for labor purposes. And there was an integration of women who were enslaved into the civilization. Slavery wasn't generational. So if a woman was enslaved and she had children, her children would then be kind of considered Arab. They would be free. She might be freed if she was married to her captor. So very difficult family history there. My family was impacted by Arab slaving and trading, and the expansion of Islam also overlapped that human trafficking of women, which is, you can think of the ancestral impact of that on women, and all the women we don't have the names anymore. So gold, I agree. Enslaved people moving across the Sahara into what's known as the Middle East, but that's a colonial term, into Arabia, the Levant region. We have trans-Saharan roots. You had cultural and religious exchange. So we had the expansion of Arabic in terms of writing. Certain African countries adopted Arabic phonetically in their own language. So there were very big educational advancements and exchanges in terms of science and agriculture, medicine. So it's quite complex, both the harms and benefits from those interactions. Gold from West Africa did reach the Mediterranean and European markets. In terms of slave trading, the major slave market in Ghana, Salaga, many African-American people trace their lineage to Ghana. So a lot of African Americans left out of Ghana to never return. Some are actually returning now, but this is difficult history stuff. So Islam spread through trade networks, influencing religion and government. Multiple African societies were impacted by this, where you find historic Islam across Africa, often overlapping with slave trade. So it's very challenging history there. People transported across the Sahara, North Africa, and Middle East. There's a huge amount of cultural blending there. Again, Arabic literacy, Arabic legal systems. different architectural styles. Indigenous spiritual practices sometimes are infused with Islam and end up becoming blended together. In Senegal, we see that. The way Islam is practiced in Senegal often mixes a lot of indigenous practices. And in some regions, indigenous religions were almost entirely eliminated. In Guinea, for example, where my grandfather was from, there was a initiative to erase indigenous spirituality. So there was social disruption from slave raiding, and sometimes chiefs from Ghana were participating, and African authorities were also participating in slave trading with Europeans and with Arabs. Portuguese built this castle, the slave castle on the coast. It became central to transatlantic slave trade. Again, links to people in the Caribbean, people in the Americas, people in South America who have Ghanaian ancestry. We're finding that out through DNA tests. Now you're starting to have, once the Portuguese established this port in Ghana, you start to see transatlantic trading and slaving eclipsing Arab slaving, although the numbers didn't match. I think you had about 18 million African people enslaved through Arab slaving and about 12 million through European slaving. So difficult history there. And you have a shift in regional power dynamics. And then you've gone from Arab influence to more European and British influence, which continues to this day. We speak English in Ghana, not Arabic. So, and also the rise of Christianity in Ghana as well. So then in terms of mineral laws, this is late 1800s, early 1900s, you had restructuring mineral rights. The crown of this country began to declare certain things crown property, more expanding extraction. Mining rights became more dominated by the crown. Chiefs and traditional authorities were dispossessed. So that's social, cultural, religious, spiritual usurpation of their power. You had desecration of sacred groves. Christian religious approaches to land use were not really compatible with Ghanaian spiritual traditions. So irreplaceable cultural damages. Chiefs were given intermediary and symbolic roles, the loss of the cultural authority, the disruption of traditional resource management. So if traditional authorities were distributing wealth, distributing food, distributing crops, distributing knowledge, that now has been interrupted. We also have issues of forced labor, exploited working conditions, as Chitsi mentioned about the DRC. We also have that in Ghana. You have obviously natural resources being processed, sometimes with toxic chemicals, which impact waterways, deforestation, soil degradation, and there's obviously health impacts on communities. Present day, so post-independence, 1962, mineral rights became part of the president's civil English model law authority of the Republic. Traditional authorities had some control over surface land, the Stool Land Ministry, which still exists to this day. There are tensions between state, kind of British colonial influence law, and traditional authority. Constitutional provision does recognize both types of land ownership, but they don't translate exactly. And again, if all the laws are written in English, it's very difficult. You can't translate everything into another language. Some cultural concepts are not translatable, which those of us who speak multiple languages, we're familiar with that. There's also the issue of galamsey. So galamsey is termed as gathering them and selling them. It's informal mining. I tend to call it unregulated. I find it challenging to consider local indigenous people who are mining in their land illegal. Some of that is somewhat a different perspective of land management and land access. Small scale mining for their livelihoods, for subsistence on their own traditional lands. But if they're doing so with dangerous chemicals, then there are serious consequences for themselves, for the environment, for their communities, etc. So you do have conflict between artisanal mining, large scale mining, who purchase concessions, who purchase access rights, and galamsey mining. Let's see, contemporary traditional authorities. Traditional chiefs are looking to get more access to participating in mining governance. Royalty distributions are questioned. They would like to have more access to them. There's also this collaboration between government and traditional authorities can support sustainable development. And there's also the need for cultural heritage consideration can be supported by traditional authorities' involvement. In terms of gold, it's still central to the symbol and national identity of the culture. Goldsmithing techniques continue to be preserved and taught. Jewelry, regalia are still a very important historic aesthetic tradition. There's also issues with museum and cultural centers who may have illegitimately gained access to Ghanaian cultural heritage. Ghana is advancing its own ownership of its cultural heritage. They've just managed to get geographic status for kente cloth. So now kente cloth is a protected cultural patrimony. Lessons from Ghana's mining history. So resource governance has been transformed through colonial intervention and globalization. Disruption of traditional systems have created lasting social tension. There can be an integration, a greater integration of customary laws with civil laws. That is incomplete though, it can be improved. Community participation, including traditional authorities, is definitely essential for natural resource management that is equitable. Artisanal mining formalization, environmental protection, heritage tourism. Ghanaian tourism is advancing actually. So there are opportunities to monetize sustainable tourism to promote better preservation of Ghanaian cultural heritage. I think that's it. So my PhD title currently is Mining, Coloniality, and the Failures of Responsible Extraction, Study of Sociocultural Harms of Extractivism in Africa. And I want to thank you guys for coming to our event, and we would love to answer questions from you. Do you want to join me up here?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for agreeing to join this event. So does anyone have any questions, comments, complaints?
I think about your talk. I think that defining the problem from a high demand of lithium and coming through the point that it's the consequence would be child labor. For me, it seems kind of like deleting the problem and not talking about the real reasons and the real problems, because always in the history there has been many points that there's a big demand for some things, some minerals, and like industrial revolution, or now about AI, there's a high demand for GPU, and in GPU there are many minerals used in GPU, and it will be also in the future. And in the Australia that has the highest mines of lithium, they have the highest number of the lithium, highest amount of lithium, but they don't have any child labor problem. So it's more structural and political problem of the countries than referring to the problem about the energy transition, or what happens when there is a high demand for lithium.
Do you have a question?
Sorry?
Do you have a question?
I think it's
It's
more a context.
Okay.
it's like more discussion.
Okay, it's good. It's good. I just want to make sure we grab everyone.
Yeah, and to me, actually, like it could be like a challenging code, but to me, like it's more like someone from oil and gas industry is funding this project, because he would think that, okay, how can we take down the renewable energy or electric vehicles industry to what is the problem with that? Okay, child labor in Africa could be one of the things. So to me, it's more than like this kind of projects are funded by renewable energy or like with good intention than something that is taking down that side, that good side.
Thank you. Hold on a second. I'm watching the time.
Yes, so I think I'd say this is a really good case for why you need to get different sorts of people together, because there's almost no child labour in lithium mining. It's not a thing, right? And it was a particular headline for cobalt. It's what happens when there's a big rush, then you bring in marginal sources, and that brought in these mines with child labour. And there's a huge, lovely, very interesting story to explore around that. But technically, you need to You need to understand the different systems and what's happening and what constitutes responsible mining. So I think you were trying to give a snapshot in a very short time, and it kind of ends up being taken as a, will more lithium produce more child labour? And the answer is no, that's not the issue with lithium. So how you get good sustainable development out of production of minerals for the energy transition is the issue, and that needs
Maybe the
a longer
storyline should be
conversation and a
changed.
deeper
because-
exploration. Yes.
Yeah, because it started from that point that came to the problem of child labor. Maybe the storyline, maybe, yeah, to me, it was like that. Maybe,
Child labor remains a problem regardless.
yeah, of course, but
The point is that, I mean, child labor is a problem when it comes to cobalt mining. I think it's just a matter of what critical mineral is being extracted. With cobalt mining, it's a big problem. And just to quickly react to what you were trying to say, I totally understand the point you're making, which is simply to say that if there's one problem in one part of the world, it shouldn't muddy the whole energy transition. But that is why we need African communitarianism, because if children are mining cobalt in Africa, and they don't even get the benefits of that. Every cobalt mined in Africa is shipped down to Europe. The children don't get the benefits of it. And it powers, well, it may not power renewable energy, but it does power home batteries and all of that. Why shouldn't they get the benefits? Why should we keep using them in order to fund the energy transition? So everyone matters. And that's why we need African communitarianism.
So let's see if there are any other, because I know some people might need to leave quite promptly. Do we have other questions? Thank you for that. We can continue the discussion, but do we have other comments, questions from anyone else? Yes.
I just have a quick one about some of your mention of the cultural heritage and the tourism stuff at the end, and also in relation to some of these coastal sites that you were showing us for the ports. And I'm just interested in whether there's sort of a joining up going on around the way in which the mining fueled industrial capitalism, which then generates climate change, which then makes those fort assets vulnerable, but they're collected to this colonial past. And you can do, oh, here's an interesting old mining site, or you can do, actually, this is all connected, and there's an opportunity here to think about how you interpret.
Yeah, so did you have is that a comment or a question?
It's kind of a question about how people, when people talk about turning that into mining into heritage, are they thinking about that critically, or are they just thinking, okay, well, we can talk about past mining?
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, for one, I think it's always valuable. I didn't integrate it into my work, but there's a symbolic sculpture, a symbolic image in Ghana called Sankofa, which is a bird. It's a mythical bird that appears. It's a philosophical concept that appears in the image of a bird that looks backwards on itself. And it's meant to be a reminder, anytime you see that bird looking back on itself, you have to learn from the past. So I think there is there's value of learning from what happened in the past. There's value of learning, obviously, what happened in the past that was horrible. Also for learning from what happened in the past that can be celebrated, because you have both of those things in all countries, horrible things and wonderful things. But in terms of turning that, I don't know about turning it into the mining into responsible tourism. I was thinking more along the lines of looking at heritage, because I think there is a level of cultural assimilation which erases cultural heritage. And that I do think is kind of a very difficult kind of crime against humanity if you're losing cultural heritage and it's irreplaceable. And I mean, Ghana's a magnificent country. So I think what you're going towards, for me, would go into my own opinions, and opinions aren't facts. My own opinions is I really would like to see African countries be more sovereign with their minerals. I would like to see them exporting less, because I don't think we need as much minerals as we think we need. We don't. We've lived on this land. I'm part British heritage. We've lived on this land for thousands of years. We don't need all those things. And if we're enslaving children in Congo, we don't need to do that. So I think there's a look, we can look at ourselves like, do I need it that badly that child, is sleeping on a mine site and is washing minerals with mercury and now is going to have reproductive issues? Because that's going to impact generations. Men aren't disposable, boys aren't disposable. They shouldn't be exposed to chemicals either. So big issues. These are big issues. Thank you.
Question online.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Thank you for your question.
Behind you.
I think it's the last one.
How to ensure governments, the signatories of Paris, this is for you, address the climate ambitions gap, decolonize international trade disparities we see today where economic competitiveness is prioritized over preserving ecological integrity? Great question.
Yeah, I mean,
Thanks, Lydia.
to start with, thanks, Lydia, for that. To start with, I think one of the biggest problems with keeping to the Paris Agreement is that everyone seems to be prioritizing their own national interest, as it were. Yeah, so everyone is trying to prioritize their own national interest, which, if you look at different developmental stages of these countries, you might say that, well, that makes sense and all of that. But I think if we continue prioritizing national development plans without paying attention to the climate, that becomes a bit of a problem. When it comes to the international trade disparity, to decolonize international trade disparities, and how I understand that is simply that there is a trade imbalance in the world. So that is not really my forte, but the little I know about that is that when talking about the trade imbalance, we find that developing countries are not necessarily favored by the global economic system, which is essentially neoliberalistic, if you will, prioritizing markets and all of that. Developing countries find it difficult getting access to resources and all of that. And if we hope to move to a stage where every country, including developing countries, are able to at least meet their obligations under the Paris Agreement, then yes, I agree. We need to rearrange. I don't want to use the word decolonize, it's a little bit strong, but we need to at least renegotiate the terms of international trade in such a way that it favors all countries, because the current trajectory, we still see us exceeding the temperature ambition in Paris Agreement. All right, I think it's a bit bleak, but I suspect that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think something that, I'm sorry, my voice is a bit funny. I want to comment on something that you said not in an adversarial way. I really personally like to frame countries as recovering economies or re-emerging economies, because a lot of the regions we're talking about were previously very powerful and advanced empires with rich international trade, but were undercut by colonial expansion and slaving, and the removal of language, the removal of culture, the removal of architecture, the destruction and desecration of everything that held the society together. So I do think if we look at things as countries as recovering economies, then it places that back into the framework of, if I'm a recovering economy, I can't have you extracting all my resources. If you need my resources, I probably need them too. And I think that's something we should be looking at in terms of African communitarianism. And I would like Europe to get on board with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one more question. This is the same one from Lydia.
A hand up, there you go.
Oh, hand up, yeah.
Swasti.
Hi,
Swasti?
Jidzi. Thank you so much for these presentations. Both of them were very thought-provoking, and of course, they add to the discourse. I actually heard both your presentations in the perspective of law making and law, thinking about how laws are created and how context shape the making of these laws, whether on the international front or on the local national front. I understand. So I have a sort of a provocation more than a this is how it must be. But how if the very ideal of law or rule making is very much situated in the logics of Western extractivist capitalism, neoliberalism, what say? These are designed to sort of, and you sort of mention it in your commentary on Ghanaian erasure of customary laws. So my question is there a scope in thinking about an alternative where we can also play around with the kind of laws that we give ourselves and how to rethink these laws itself, which are not only for the end goal is not just extraction or aiding in a recovering economy, which also will obviously prioritize its own sovereign interest. But really, the form of law is what I'm trying to understand and getting at. And a lot of commentaries against international trade is that these laws simply don't work because the local realities are so different and customary realities are so different. And so, yeah, just a provocation.
I think, can I answer?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so partially, and then I'll get to you. So, Asti, I thank you very much for mentioning that. I think you're right. Obviously, this whole presentation is in English and we are in the United Kingdom. So that is a symbol of some history right there in itself. I think one of the things that's important is the fact that some of the aspects of law or governance or politics that we consider European actually were extracted from indigenous civilizations. So the concept of democracy that emerged with the founding fathers in the United States was actually inspired directly from the Iroquois Confederacy of Native American conflict resolution, which came from a specific conflict that was resolved by a woman between two warring ethnic groups. And so that the symbolism behind that is actually Native American. We have lots and lots of indigenous ways of natural resource management and natural resource distribution that exist all over the planet. And I do believe in terms of African communitarianism and other types of indigenous natural resource and resource redistribution, we could be looking back into the past and seeing which of these systems could still be reintegrated and which of them still exist. I mean, as a person who's worked in multiple different countries on different continents, I've benefited from cultures that are extremely generous. There is a generosity that goes way beyond Eurocentric or American concept of giving and sharing in non-European cultures that, you know, I have colleagues in this very building who share their food with me all the time. And it makes me a challenge to bring enough food to share with my colleagues. And that is also part of the way societies can function. And that gets to Lydia's point about circularity and sufficiency. If we look at these communal practices of resource sharing, we could see some root of how to shift things back into circularity. That's just a comment.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually very helpful. Swasti, thanks for your question. I think I'll just make it really brief to say that for us to rethink the role of law, I think we need to start considering the fundamental underpinnings of law. And by that, I'm just trying to talk about interrogating what is the basis of law and all. That's obviously something that is not easy to achieve. And my presentation has been on international law, and that's because I believe in international law, not necessarily as a perfect law, because international law, and it is good that Madeline talked about how, you know, colonial past in Ghana, international law was complicit with all of that and all. But I believe in international law because it's the best bet we've got. But then again, I don't just believe in having international law in the way it's currently framed. And that is why we need something like African communitarianism. If we infuse African communitarianism into law, we would be able to impute core values that ordinarily would not be present. So when we talk of identity and solidarity, international law does not necessarily brook that. And that is simply because the idea of international law that we've got now is Western based. It's West-centric, if you will. Absolutely. So I'll just say interrogating those. But I'm sure you know that, but that's an area you've really worked on and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good conversation to think about. And Chidzi, you summarized it well about the foundations of law and moral and that kind of confrontation that we have with what is or what enables a rulemaking or a lawmaking futures possible. And both your commentaries on extractivism sort of sheds light on that kind of foundations or what goes into that foundation. So thank you very much. Both of that was very, very good and exciting to hear. Exciting, quote unquote.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for coming. I'll give you guys a hand of applause online. Do you have any comments?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to say thank you on the presentation. I had two questions.
Yeah.
So first was, do you think the geographical location of Africa kind of empowers the energy transition, or does it kind of lower the just energy transition, not necessarily for Africa, but geographical setting of each country? Does it contribute to a better way of transitioning energy? And the other question was, Do you think multinational corporations play a role in kind of advocating for the benefit of the gold mining industry? Like, as you said, you want it to contribute to the society in a better way.
Mhm.
So do private actors have a say in that?
Okay, I'll just go first very briefly. That's actually a very good question. But instead of the geographical location determining, how Africa perceives the energy transition or what contribution Africa would make, I probably would say maybe the political configuration of Africa being a determining factor. And if we look at it from that perspective, we would say that, well, Africa has been forgotten, if you will, in conversations on the energy transition. That's a provocation. I know that can actually lead to repeated conversation and all that. But that is the truth, because many of the challenges associated with the global energy transition can be found, well, not only in Africa, but in largely developing countries or global south countries and all of that. So in that sense, Africa's, well, maybe not contribution, but the problems associated with energy transition can be found there. But finally, in terms of contribution, real contribution, then we can also count African countries. And that is where African communitarianism comes in. Really sorry, I'm biased on that. I'm African, but I'm sure you can have ethical theories from other countries as well. You're talking of China and Latin America and all of that. But the contribution that these philosophies can make, like African communitarianism, is something that is really, really tangible. So I guess that is Africa's contribution to the energy transition. So it's kind of like a giant fist. One fist is looking towards the challenges, the other towards the contribution.
Thank you. If anyone needs to leave, please don't stay if it's going to interrupt your day. I wanted to answer the questions here. I'm trying to be in front of the camera as well. So thank you for your question. Now, again, this is going to enter into opinion, right? So I'm signaling opinion here, which means bias, which means relative and subjective. So I've worked in the private sector. I've worked for mining companies. I quit working for the mining company because of the ethical concerns I had for what was happening. I worked in the Congo for 4 years. I love the Congo. Congolese people are amazing. Congo is beautiful. Africa is amazing, but the countries that I've been able to visit really have touched me. And I'll give you 2 anecdotes to answer your question in terms of companies. Do they have a role in responsibility? I'm extremely cynical. That's bias. Okay, and then my bias comes from my experience in the private sector. Undergraduate, first course I took in my undergraduate, business ethics. American professor, big guy, big beard, belt here, button-down shirt, red face, very nice man. Dr. J. Mark Thomas. First thing he said in the class of business ethics was, business ethics, there's no such thing as business ethics. The course was entitled Business Ethics. And that really caught my attention. And I was like, oh, this is great. Finally, I'm not being lied to in a classroom setting. And he laid the stage that business is profit-oriented. It is profit-oriented and it will be profit-oriented. And unfortunately, when things are profit-oriented, there's a tendency to do whatever you can to make money, including at times, unfortunately, and this is anywhere in the world, at times violating laws, at times violating ethics. If there is a legal system that can punish you, they will punish you. This is something that any individual working for a company could engage in for his or her own enrichment, but it can also happen on a company level. So keeping that in mind in any sector, including baby formula, right? So if it can go from baby formula, why couldn't it go in the gold industry? Right, so that's just a very general view. Now, here's something specific. I'm not going to disclose exactly where this happened. I get headhunted for roles in responsible mining. Director of ESG, environmental social governance, CSR. People look at me, they find me online, they write to me and they say, I want you to join our company. Great. So I was headhunted by a major mineral consortium that oversees the global trade of a specific mineral, which I will not name because then you could identify the company. And I went through 7 interviews. They headhunted me. They wanted me to be director of ESG for this major valuable mineral globally, which oversaw 25 of the largest mining companies in this specific mineral. And they said, if we hire you, last interview, 7 interviews, if we hire you, what do you think will be the most difficult part of being the head of ESG, environmental social governance? Keeping in mind my specialty is social, it's people and culture, and land and civilization and families and healthcare, all that. what do you think is going to be the most difficult thing? And I said, well, what will be difficult is if you don't allow me to do my job. If you don't allow me to talk to your 25 companies and you don't allow me to talk to the communities in the countries where those 25 companies work, that would be difficult. And they said, oh, no, we don't want you to talk to the companies. We don't want you to consult with the communities either. We just want you to talk to the public and the investors. And I compare that to if you're going to buy my house, and Armin is the estate agent. Armin is selling my house to you. Armin is supposed to come and inspect my house. I don't let him in my house. Armin, I want you to tell them how beautiful my house is and how clean it is. Don't come inside. That was the position they were setting me up to do. Now, I could have taken that job, but then my credibility would have been used as a weapon to harm all those people. And I don't consent to that, which is why I'm doing a PhD. You know, so mining companies can, but it really ends up being discretionary. One, it's discretionary as to who the leader of the company is. If he or she or they has a moral compass, he or she or they wants to institutionalize that within their organization and make it policy, or whether he or she or they and the whole company is subjected to laws that require them to do that. But if you go and work in a country with shaky jurisdiction because they just had a coup d'etat, then you make friends with the person who has done the coup d'etat. Make friends with him or her, you buy him or her a Rolex and a Lexus and a Rolls Royce and a private jet, and there you go. You've got a mining permit. And that's, I also worked in fraud prevention and bribery prevention. And that's a reality. If I take over a government, you come and be my friend. And so you need the laws, you need that, you know, that rule of law in order to prevent normal human behavior. Humans are self-interested everywhere. It's not an African problem, it's a global problem. People like to say, well, Africa's corrupt. So where did the money come from? Were they dollars? Were they euros? Were they pounds? That's a you problem. Yeah, so enough about that, but I hope I answered your question. And that's obviously bias, but bias from experience, unfortunately.
I think it's a good thing. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's it, yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone online. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for your questions. Thank you very much. And have a good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, what are you doing?